Hi, this is John Delancey, and you are listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to episode 215 of the Cinema Geeks. I am one of your Cinema Geeks Optimus Solo, and joining me once again is the Comic Concierge. How you doing, Dan?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. We are back at it again in like extra innings, sudden death, bonus material. I don't know what you want to call this, but we are in the extra innings of our Alfred Hitchcock retrospective. We've covered 10 films, and now we're going into some bonus films that we had not planned on originally, but we're having such a good time that we decided to just keep it going for a little bit longer. So today we are covering the 1940 American romantic psychological thriller, is all the words that they put against this one, I guess. This is Rebecca, one of his more famous ones. I'm not sure how it didn't make it into our first draft, but we're making up for it now. So Rebecca is a film that is based off of a 1938 novel of the same name by Daphne du Maurier, who is also the person that did the short story that The Birds was based off of. This one's obviously directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and it stars Laurence Olivier, Joan Fontaine, Judith Anderson, George Sanders, Gladys Cooper, and a few other folks. Dan, just to reiterate, I know we talk about it at the end of every episode, but for those that are just tuning into this episode, what is your experience with Rebecca going into this one?
I have no experience with Rebecca, which is a weird thing to say, because I have a sister named Rebecca. So, but no, this is a first time watch for me, and I honestly think, unlike a lot of other Hitchcock films, where you have so many scenes that are just so well known in the zeitgeist, like that, like when you watch the Oscars or any movie award show, that they always get referenced. Like for Rebecca, like I feel like I'm going in the most blind out of 39 Steps, but the first film we did. So I was going into this rather fresh. Like I've heard rumblings, and I think I've listened to some reviews way back when, but I did not really know what it was about outside of that. I knew Rebecca was a character that was not in the movie, but the movie was about her. But that was about it.
Yeah, I am much the same. I did not know anything about this one. I had not had anything spoiled for me, really. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know anything about the characters, anything about the plot, or anything whatsoever. So I was going in completely blind. Now, partway through the viewing for this episode, I did obviously pick up on a character that I have heard of, obviously. I think we even talked about it during our top 100 villains of all time. And if I'm not mistaken, we mentioned one of the characters in this film. So I was immediately suspicious of her, I guess, just because of that. But outside of that, I didn't really have any experience with this one. And just to keep everybody somewhat clear with where we're at here, the first 10 we did were in chronological order, starting in 1935 and going into the 60s. Now we're going all the way back to 1940. So to put that in place of what else we've watched, the 39 Steps was 1935. Rebecca is 1940, and then Notorious is, I believe, right after that. So this comes out after the 39 Steps and before Notorious, if we're trying to place it within his other work. So upon first viewing, Dan, of this film that we had to resort to crazy methods to watch, what was your initial reaction?
Crazy but legal methods, I think we should point out.
Yes. Very legal.
Yeah, oddly enough, this is on YouTube, but like no actual streaming service at the moment, which is crazy considering it's such a notorious film. Not notorious the movie, but well known and everything like that. But yeah, so going into this, I'm going to make a weird comparison. Maybe it doesn't make sense, but I'll try to explain it. But to me, after this viewing, Rebecca is to the Alfred Hitchcock filmography that Jackie Brown is to Quentin Tarantino's filmography. And let me explain why. I feel like when you tell someone Quentin Tarantino made a movie, they have certain ideas of what that movie is like. He's a bit abrasive. There's a certain style that is associated with his directing. And Jackie Brown, I think, is an example of him going a different route, and I think maybe being a bit more reserved and having a story that is far more driven by plot and narrative compared to a lot of what he did before. And I feel in a lot of ways similar with Rebecca, where Rebecca is a story that is, it has thrilling moments, and it certainly has some bigger moments in general, but it is not a movie that is spectacle like a North by Northwest or even a Psycho or some of the other films we did, Vertigo, for example. Most of it takes place. It's almost the inverse of Rear Window. A lot of it just takes place inside, in that regard, and it is far more driven by the narrative, by the story. Where the other Hitchcock films we've done so far, what I have enjoyed about them, at times the narrative, but it was pretty much just the craft of it and the characters. And this has great characters as well, but I was enthralled by the narrative. I was actually, and it took me a bit to kind of hook into it, but I thought I knew where it was going, and not that I need surprises for a movie to be good, but when it like inversed on itself, I was like, oh, okay, it all started to click. And I'm like, now I see why it's so well regarded. And it's not that it's not shot well; it's beautifully lit. It's that the manner that this takes place in, as cliche as it sounds, becomes its own character. But I really enjoyed it. I was fascinated with the story progression and just the way it went. There may be some issues we're talking about, or some things that I didn't think fully connected. But as a film, it feels very different from the Hitchcock films we did before. So I'm glad we included it. But despite it being different, I think that's a lot what I enjoyed about it, and I was a big fan of watching this. How about yourself?
I interestingly enough was finding it kind of a fascinating journey to go all the way through 2.5 or 3, however many decades. I guess 1935 to what, 1963? What was Birds? 19 somewhere in
1963.
there. Yeah, so like we covered like 3 decades of films, right? And we saw a progression in what Hitchcock was doing and things that the way he was making films, the what his focus was and what he was trying to do in different aspects, kind of traveling through time with him. And I found it very interesting to then go back now and watch what we're going to be doing. I guess for the most part is like now filling in some gaps along the way, and it's kind of interesting how they fit in, and if they remind you of the films from that time period that we were watching, or if they connect to films that come later. I think that's going to be something interesting to kind of keep track of. And this is about smack dab in the middle of the 39 Steps and Notorious, right? So it's 5 years after the one. I think it's like 6 years before the other. So it's in the middle of that. And one thing I appreciated was something that I felt like we were somewhat veering away from towards the end, which was these great side slash supporting characters. And so I really appreciated that we kind of got back into that. There's a lot of characters to enjoy, whether you enjoy them from the entertainment standpoint of just like what they're doing and how they're portraying the character and how the actors portraying them, or what they, if they had a bigger part in the story or different things. Like I found drawn to a number of different characters in this one outside of just the main two leads, which was something that I enjoyed. The another thing that I think separates this, and you're basically alluding to it with your opening commentary, is a lot of the Hitchcock films that we talked about were very, regardless of film length, were very quickly paced, I guess is the way I would say
Mm.
it. Like there never seemed to be a lot of like lulls. There never seemed to be a lot of really digesting like a scene and taking it all in. Like a lot of it is somewhat fast paced, where it's like you get that and then you're on to the next thing and then you're on to the next thing. And this is definitely a departure from that. Like he definitely is taking his time in the way that he is telling this story. And I'm not sure how I land on that because I'm so used to the other thing that he had been doing. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Like I like taking my time. I like being able to like think through and kind of like really mull on the stuff as it's happening. It threw me off a little bit though that it was happening in a Hitchcock film, which I had not seen yet. So like
Mhm.
there was a little bit of like pacing questions, I guess, in my head as I was going through here. There was a few moments where I was wondering if this really felt like a Hitchcock film, where we were going. I will say that the final or the first act is fantastic. Like I really enjoy the first act. I think it's very humorous. It is quick paced in the beginning, and I like the way it sets the stage. And then I think the film in the we'll call it the last act. I don't know what the time stamp was. I don't know if it's the last third, the last quarter, whatever the case may be. Really ramps up there at the end and is kind of firing on all cylinders during that last, we'll call it, I don't know, 30 minutes. There was some moments in between that or in the middle that I felt it was dragging even a little bit, but I don't know if that's just because I've become used to how fast he's been moving in all the other films versus if I was watching this next to watching like a whole bunch of non-Hitchcock films. Like I don't know how that would come across. But you're definitely right. It's definitely Hitchcock going down a different route with this one, which I appreciated. I think there's a couple things that in the middle and a couple times where felt like we were doing the same thing over and over again, like a little bit of repetitiveness. But I think the beginning of it's fantastic. I think the end of it for me saves it. So I ultimately come down favorably on this film as far as like liking it. I am wrestling with myself as far as where it like stacks up against all of the other films that we've seen. I I think it's probably top half for me, but I'm still kind of wrestling with that and hoping that, talking it through with you a little bit here may help me even more. Before we get into some more about the story though, I'm curious if you have any experience with some of the actors or actresses in this film. Like obviously Laurence Olivier is like a everybody knows his name, right, in the film world. I had never seen a film with him in it. I'd never seen a film with Joan Fontaine in it, I don't believe, or just about anybody involved with this. Did you have any experience with any of the actors or actresses in this one?
Not that I know of. Yeah, like Laurence Olivier, it is like that name. It is like you synonymous with Hollywood, old Hollywood. But I don't. The only thing I think movies I've seen, only actor I think I've seen movies with was George Sanders. Like I'm trying to think of what I've seen him in. All About Eve. He was in All About Eve, which is one of my favorite films. So he's in that. So I wasn't familiar with him in that film, but Lawrence Olivier, as you know, as horrible as it might sound, wasn't really familiar with it. This was Joan Fontaine's first major film, I think. But I can't think of much else I have seen her in outside of this. I know she's done of course, some other Hitchcock films as well. Same thing with like Judith Anderson. Not that I'm aware of that I've seen her before. I know like, this was kind of a huge role for her, like her first Oscar nomination. But she was in Cat in a Hot Tin Roof, which I have seen, but I don't remember her in that per se. So, but and I guess she was
Yeah.
in Star Trek 3 too, but I don't know her in that as well.
Wow. Okay. I don't remember that at all. I'm gonna have to like do some research after this
She's
about that
the
one.
Vulcan High Priestess. So there you go.
Okay. Crazy. Learn something new every day. So yeah, so we're fairly new to most of these folks. I remember a few of the names like sounded familiar, whether they've been in Leo Carroll, who plays the doctor, was in Strangers on a Train and North by Northwest, but I'd have to
Yeah.
like try to figure out who he was in those films right off the top of my head. But it was interesting. It was fun to see Laurence Olivier in like my first experience. Like I haven't seen Spartacus. I don't know. Like that's probably a crime against humanity when it comes to film review that you haven't seen
Oh,
that film. But
I have seen Spartan, but that was not one of my dad's favorite films. So I was like super young, like 10. So it's been
okay,
a long time since I've seen that.
so it was fun seeing some of these folks for what was for me the first time seeing it. What did you think about the beginning? So the beginning we have basically we're in a hotel and we are introduced to who would become the second Mrs. De Winter, played by Joan Fontaine. We're introduced to the Mister, Max De Winter, played by Laurence Olivier, and then Joan Fontaine's I don't know what name you would give her, the employer of her
Yeah,
for a
employer.
minute.
Those are employer. Yeah.
Yeah, so played by Florence Bates, and it kind of sets the stage to how the main two characters are introduced to each other and kind of how they fall for each other and things of that nature. So everything that's happening in that hotel, which I'll just call it like the first act. What was your take on that?
I liked it. It was probably, honestly, you said the middle part was your least favorite. I would say it was my least favorite. I guess out of the three acts, but you talked about how it was a bit repetitive, and I could see some of it there, but I think it was important to kind of build that relationship between uh, who would become Mrs. Fontaine. It had a bit of it almost had like a whimsy to it, like almost felt like a classic, um, like romantic comedy in a way, like the way it was portraying. And,
Yeah.
and not knowing what this movie was, I'm like, oh, does this become more of a romantic comedy? Because the way it was, going about it, of course, you have the employer who's like the aloof, overweight person that just trying to hit on someone that was like, get with someone who's like half her age, or maybe not half her age, but I don't know. But yeah, it was I think a good introduction into these characters. It really gave Mrs. De Winter like a sense of innocence, which was I think really important as the movie went into its second act, to see that innocence kind of be taken advantage of in some ways. But yeah, so I thought it served its purpose, of course.
Yeah, I just found the Florence Bates character to be interesting, like as repulsive as she is, like
Yes.
she adds some humor to it. She's clearly, I guess you would call it, what would the kids say these days, like chasing clout. Like she's trying to find like the famous people. She's trying to like who's the most famous person in this hotel that she can act like she knows,
Yeah.
or invite to her something that she's got going on or whatever, with like this delusional aspect of like that he's actually going to be interested in her for
Yeah.
whatever reason is kind of crazy. And then of course she's treating uh the what is I gotta find out what the second Mrs. Winter's name is. Do they give her a name? She's gotta have a first name, right?
No, she doesn't. That's the whole thing. She doesn't have a name.
Oh,
Her
gotcha.
name
I
is
feel
Mrs.
weird.
De Winter,
Okay. I feel weird
and she
just
just
calling her that the whole time.
that's her. Yeah, that's her actual name in the script. She's never given a full first name. And same thing with the book as well. That's based on. She's never
Okay.
given a full first name. So I think it's obviously a purposeful choice with a movie called Rebecca. That the main protagonist is not given an actual first name. To just it's just a
Right.
yeah, a
I guess yeah,
literary
it does though
piece.
too. Like it definitely adds something to it because of the and we'll jump ahead this in a minute when they get to the Manderley. But what I was gonna say is just you get to see how poorly the employer is treating the employee in that situation.
Yeah.
And like you said, it really does add to the innocence and whatnot. And then I think it is clever that they don't give her a name because she's constantly, being compared to this other individual, the first Mrs. De Winter, who does have a name. So it definitely sets those two apart in a lot of the aspects, whether subconsciously, consciously, or whatever. So I do agree there is a little bit of repetitiveness as far as like the courting of between the two of them, and I'm not sure how well all of that is executed in general. It's almost like I don't know. It's a sequence that you almost feel like
Yeah.
you'd today you'd get like a montage, right? You just get like you would just get like the real quick version, or you would get something that's much more clever and romantic and like you're buying into all of the different things, and we don't get either of those here, so it's like half like a montage and half like we're sort of like learning about them. But
Mhm.
so a little bit on the execution there was not the greatest for me. I just liked the dynamic that they were showing between these three individuals as they kind of navigated that, and I thought it was a clever way to introduce us to those three. And then of course we transition into them moving into his mansion, the Manderley, and introduced to all of the different people that work there, whether it be the housekeeper, I don't know what all of their titles are because some of them are doing different things, but there's maids, there's butlers, there's housekeepers, there's
Mhm.
somebody that apparently takes care of the finances or something. They all have different roles. And then obviously introduced to the fact that there was a former Mrs. De Winter, and that's going to play a crucial part in the middle section of this film, obviously it's going to play a crucial part in the whole film, but in the middle part, we're really navigating this water of the two Mrs. De Winters and this new one trying to come to terms with it, trying to become comfortable in this estate and things of that nature. So you said you liked that part of the film. And I shouldn't say I dislike the middle. I think there's a lot of clever stuff that happens in the middle and a lot of very important stuff. I just felt like sometimes the pacing in the middle section was a little like stop and start. But what were some of the things you liked the most about this kind of middle section as she gets introduced to this estate?
I thought Joan Fontaine, who I think you could argue maybe gives a performance that's very much of the time for a lot of it, especially in that first act where you have that love story and it's very much like, fairy tale. They meet each other and they're in love and it's, melodramatic, and there's some of those moments, but I feel like in the second act that's where she gets her ability to opportunity, I should say, to give some more subdued and nuanced performance beats, like just seeing her just being in that house alone and just her reaction to everything. Just you could see her becoming overwhelmed with like the world she's kind of thrown into and this like ultimate competition she's playing against, and the back and forth with her and Mrs. Danvers, who like Judith Anderson to me makes this movie I know you talked about one of the best villains list we did. If I were you to do that list, I would have ranked her much higher. Of all the Hitchcock films we've done thus far, I think to me, even like looking at Psycho, I think she is my favorite villain out of all of it, and largely because of the performance of Judith Anderson. She just has this bleakness, this coldness to her. That the one scene where she's like showing like just the delicacy of the garment and the mind game she's playing. I don't know. I found fascinating. In very much doesn't almost even seem of that time in a way.
Right.
The way that she's approaching the character, and that's what I liked about that second act was their back and forth. But then like you get those moments where Mrs. De Winter kind of takes charge of it, where she gets to the point where she has a breaking point and moves through it. But then that's when the third act kicks in the I shouldn't say that's when the third act. She kind of that final piece is played with her putting on that costume and things like that. So I like that back and forth and seeing just like I felt for her because of just she's always going to play second fiddle, and which is why I think I ended up liking the third act more when we get the twist. And I don't think we can spoil this movie; it's been out forever. But if you have not seen it, where in fact it wasn't that Maxim loved Rebecca, is that he hated her, and I get so like feeling like I knew where this was going or had an idea of what was happening. It just recontextualized everything that happened beforehand, and I really like that. I just thought that was kind of I wasn't expecting a twist because I don't hear many people talk about this being a twist, and maybe it's not necessarily like a M. Night Shyamalan type of twist,
Right.
but it completely changes kind of the direction of what was happening and the relationship, and even the impact it has on Joan Fontaine's character. And if anything, it's kind of odd that she is so just nonchalant about the fact that her husband maybe murdered her, or at least committed manslaughter through his previous wife. But then I also kind of get it because she was becoming to hate Rebecca so much that I think the relief kind of made it all feel okay. But that's why I just liked how those acts connected and the importance it was to the growth of that character. So that's why it worked for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think a lot of the things that you're mentioning did work for me as well. I don't want to try to like downplay what I said in the beginning. I probably was a little bit too harsh in the way I categorized it. I just thought that there was a couple times where there was a little bit of that same type of repetitiveness that we got with like when they're first meeting, or maybe just a few slow moments or something like that. But I agree, like the introduction of Mrs. Danvers like completely changes this film. And you could argue that like from a plot standpoint, you don't necessarily need her as far
Yeah.
as like it doesn't advance any of the main plot lines, right? Like all the other stuff can still happen whether she's there or not, which is crazy because she adds so much though in the actual
Mhm.
like whether she's important or not to like some of the superficial elements of the plot, she's so important to all of the other things that go into this. And like I agree, like she has a presence about her, like just immediately. Like as soon as she's
Mhm.
on screen, whether it's how it was shot, whether it's the performance, there's just like a cold, calculating presence of her. Like it to me, the only thing that I can connect this to, and I know it's a much different character, but from old like Hollywood is the Wicked Witch of the West, like
Hmm.
in Wizard of Oz, and she has a lot helping her on that side because she's got the whole the
Yeah.
witch look, right? Like she's got all that going for her. Mrs. Danvers is pulling that off with none of the makeup, with none of the costuming, but still that same presence of like when she's on screen, you're like, oh, like something's going to happen here. And I think that's part of what. There's a couple things that really help that twist. Number one, it's almost set up like where we're basically going down a path to an ultimate like showdown between these two individuals, right?
Yeah.
Like the new Mrs. De Winters and Mrs. Danvers. And we get some of that along the way, but it feels like that's where the movie's going, right? Like we're gonna keep hinting at the fact that she doesn't like her and that she's doesn't like that she's taken the old Mrs. Rebecca's spot, things of that nature. And it seems like it's gonna be keep going down that road and culminate with something like where those two specific they hint at it like at that window scene where you're
Oh
kind of
yeah,
contemplating with yourself whether she's actually gonna like toss her out the window right there. Like
that that scene was diabolical. She's like, "Yeah, just do it." Like the way she was playing that, because like before that, she was had a little bit of a light touch, but then she went
Mhm.
all in, like trying to get you to jump out. Like this lady didn't do anything to you. It's
Right.
you're so mean.
Well,
You're
because
so mean.
at first it's much more passive, right? It's much more
Yeah,
you could interpret it one way or you could interpret it that way. So you're trying to like put yourself in Joan Fontaine's shoes and like how you would take that, and you can see yourself debating like, oh, she's just uncomfortable with they're a new person here, and there's that comes with the human nature, right? A new person in charge
hmm
or a new person in there is going to do things different. You're not used to that. You're used to the whatever your habits and routines were before, so you're kind of like finding yourself excusing a lot of what she's doing at the beginning, and then it just keeps getting like worse and worse, and then that obviously that sequence you're like, well, there's no gray area anymore. Like this
yeah,
lady wants her to kill herself. So I think that's one twist is that we don't go down that road 100%. We kind of do in different ways, but that's not where the movie is kind of culminating. Um, I know the last sequence, or the last scene would say yes, it is, but obviously there's a whole nother sequence with uh, the court or police and like the
yeah,
Favel character and all that other stuff, which is kind of like the main culmination, right? And so it's going a completely different direction. And the other thing I think that really keeps you from guessing where this is going is you're never going to guess that Max despises Rebecca because of how much of Rebecca's stuff is still here,
yeah,
right? Like he still has all of like not only does she have like a room that has all of this her bed area and all this embroidered things and her clothing and stuff like that. But then we find out, you have this whole other like cabin that's full of her stuff as well. And it's like you wouldn't that doesn't correlate to somebody that can't stand somebody. You would think gets rid of her and gets rid of all of her stuff immediately because he doesn't want anything to remind him of her. So like that really kind of throws you off too when you find out that he actually doesn't love her because it's like all the signs are is that he not only loved her but that he's not over it based on everything we see in this house, everything we see in this cabin and things like that. So it's very clever the way they kind of completely are throwing you into different directions before you see what the real kind of substance is behind their relationship, which they kind of keep hidden for a good chunk of the film. What
yeah.
did you
You think
think?
it's
Go ahead.
sorry,
Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go for it.
You think it's like pain. You think it's like
Right.
agony, but it's really guilt. I guess maybe not even guilt, but more fear or anger, which is it. And he got angry because of, but not. It wasn't because of the way or how you assumed it was. Since he lost the one he loved, and yeah, I thought it played with that really well, which is why I think like even like rewatching this would be interesting because it would make scenes read so much differently knowing what you know once the movie ends.
Right. And then obviously we get into this sequence with the Jack Favel character who is implying that Max killed Rebecca. Rebecca would never commit suicide after they find her body, which is not the body that he originally identified as hers. So we have a two different body situation. Her body's still in the boat at the bottom of the water, and he's saying that it's not a suicide, that he killed her, which is kind of true. And then he's going about this whole thing where he's trying to, which is just a clever sequence where he's going to jump in the car, I guess, when the court's out for lunch while they're eating a picnic inside the car, which I've never thought of doing. But I guess that's one, I guess you do it during road trips. It just is, it's an interesting setup. They're like, yeah, they brought us lunch and we're going to have a picnic in this car real quick before the court continues. And he jumps in there and obviously is blackmailing him. And you don't expect Max to just immediately go straight to the officials and be like, hey, this
Yeah.
guy's trying to blackmail me right now, which was, I thought was fantastic. And I'm like, oh, how is this going to work out? And then, of
Yeah.
course, he shares the note. They're going to, there was a doctor involved, a potential pregnancy. They're going to drive to the doctor to figure all that out. And that does not go how this Jack character thinks it's going to go. What was your take kind of on this whole like twist and turn, like fast pace conclusion of his trial, so to speak, or the trial of trying to
Yeah.
figure out like what happened to Rebecca?
First, like, it has to be like the worst police officer ever, who's like, "Well, I guess I have to bring you along." Like, no, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have to do that. Like, that's not how that works. But whatever. It makes for a better story. Uh, Again, looking into it, like I thought the way it was going to play out was that one guy that older gentleman that was acting strange, that it was going to be played on him. Like, there was going to be a thing where they have to like have him take the fall for what he did. So I wasn't expecting as many different twists and turns. Also weird that this also delves into incest, and no one seemed to question it
Nope.
like that much. Like, it was like, why
I
aren't they
did.
like? They're not. They're just gonna go with it. Like, they, he doesn't say it, like, but he heavily hints at what they were doing. Like, I was just waiting for someone to react, to be like, "Wait, what? Are you cousins?" And nope, that we're all gonna be okay with that. What? So I was like, okay, I guess you are her favorite cousin. Weird. And then when the scene breaks out and we learn that there was another body there, I thought it was going to be that Rebecca was like cheating on him. Like, that was where I was going. Oh, there was somebody else that
Mhm.
she was actually cheating on him, and that's not where it went. It does play out pretty quickly. Like, I did like how he went directly to I don't know if it was a judge or what role, basically saying like, hey, he's
Right.
trying to do this, and how it played out. And the resolution of it, I think, was pretty satisfying in the sense of um, knowing that in the end, Rebecca really ended up winning, because she was going to die and clearly baited him into doing it beforehand, just to win their statistic game. But
Right.
making her such a kind of really fascinating figure, even though we don't actually ever see Rebecca in any meaningful way outside of some photos. But it did go rather quickly. You mentioned the pacing piece. I think clearly, like, they knew where they wanted to go, and then it's like, okay, let's get there. I'm guessing in the novel it's probably maybe prolonged a bit more, but I was okay with it. I was okay, just move it along. Get to what you need to get to. It maybe tied things up a little bit, and it is all kind of dependent upon happenstance as well, which I didn't have a problem with, because I think it led to a better story. But yeah,
I think
I could see having issues with the way it went down, but I found the end result made it worth it.
Yeah, I actually quite enjoyed that whole segment, because I think my favorite part is we're led to believe that, I mean, the setup here is that this Jack character is right. Like, in our minds at that
Yeah,
point, he's right. Like, he's right. Max did kill Rebecca. It wasn't a suicide. We know that as the audience, and this guy's onto it. And it's like that suspense of, how are you're going to try to prove this, but in reality, he's right. So so it all sets that kind of up where you're like, well, how are you going to get out of this? Because he's on to you. He knows what happened. That is what happened. And like, we're expecting different things to happen, as opposed to,
yeah,
especially when that doctor reveals what she was there for, as far as, the terminal illness and all of that type of stuff. Like, that's completely out of the blue. Like, you're not expecting that. And that whole doctor sequence is kind of clever, because they start it with, I didn't see anybody by that name. So we have to go through that part, because it's like, we think this Jack guy is going to have him like hook, line, and sinker basically, and then the first piece of information we get from the doctor is I never treated somebody named Rebecca, and so we have to figure out that she was under a Mrs. Danvers' name, and then we're like, well, now you're still going to get screwed because now they have the right person, and then we find out it's a completely different
Mm,
diagnosis. So like it was just clever the way they did that because from the audience standpoint, they gave us enough for us to be like, well, he's right, and this Max guy is going to be
yeah,
screwed. And then I also think what I really liked about that whole sequence from beginning to end is it really gave Laurence Olivier a chance to kind of strut his stuff a little bit. I
yeah,
felt like for different times in the movie that he was a little underwhelming.
mm,
Maybe not at the very beginning when we're introduced to him, but there's this like back and forth where he's about her and not about her and very cryptic about this Rebecca and not and like all this other stuff. So there was like some points in the middle, which I get why, but like he doesn't really get to like just come out and do everything that he needs to do from an acting standpoint. It's like it's a very subdued performance and kind of a very hem haw like in and out of this. Like, how much are you really into the second Mrs. De Winter? Can
yeah,
we believe it? Can we not believe it? But then when we get to this last sequence, he's really just like he's not Cary Grant in North by Northwest necessarily, but he is having fun with playing off of this Jack Favel character and kind of going through this different route, which I did appreciate because up to that point, I was like, I was expecting more out of this famous actor that I've
yeah,
always heard of.
yeah. He had a tough role because he had, like you said, he I could understand like, well, for the second half, he is not there for a lot of it. Um,
Right.
but I don't think he ever came off as super charming, but I think that's also purposeful because of considering everything. Like he always had a bit of there was always something like darker underneath, and it all made sense. And I think, like you said, in that final act, it all kind of came out, and then
Hmm.
everything kind of starts to make even more sense regarding some of the choices early on. So I do think he gets outshined by you know
Oh
Joan
yeah.
Fontaine and Judith Anderson, but I think he
Yes.
plays the part he needs to.
Yeah, and it does obviously lead us to a point where as an audience, especially an audience in 2025, we're knowing immediately when he sends her back to like the house that that's like a bad idea.
Yeah,
Like, and especially then when you see Jack call Mrs. Danvers to tell her how things went and that, the real story behind Rebecca and then obviously there's a race by Max and his I still don't know what that guy's role is, but his right hand man at the
yeah,
mansion to go back, and then obviously they see the mansion on fire, and we get our final sequence where we see that the second Mrs. De Winter is going to survive, and then we get to see Mrs. Danvers in the what was it, the West Wing? I don't know if that's where she
yeah.
was, but in the West Room, as the house comes down. So, what did you think about that final conclusion?
I really liked. I felt the final act was really strong, and as I mentioned previously, the spectacle was something that this film didn't have a lot of, but we got it with that massive fire, and it does. It is that cleansing that was needed of for this for them all to move on, and then obviously Mrs. Danvers, who couldn't do that, having to deal with the ultimate fate of what happened. So I thought it all kind of came together really nicely in the end.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was a clever way to end it. Definitely some harrowing last sequences that we see Mrs. Danvers in, which is interesting because you don't always see like the villain, so to speak, of you know classic stories like that take themselves out, I guess. But that's
Yeah.
definitely what happens. Like she starts that fire herself and is the only one that's gonna go down in it. So I thought that was interesting too. Before we kind of get into some final thoughts, was there anything Hitchcockian that we saw along the way? I know we talked about it's a little bit different with the way it's telling the story and kind of the pacing and some of that type of stuff. There really isn't a mother figure, although I will say that from what I read, Mrs. Danvers in the book is a mother figure to
Yeah.
Max, or more of a mother figure that is basically very protective of him, doesn't want any, doesn't want to share her affection of him with, any of the girls or the ladies that he's interested in, things like that. So the kind of interesting that for once I know it was still early on, but Hitchcock had a story that did have a mother figure, and he changes it, or maybe the screenwriter changes it, but Alfred Hitchcock obviously puts his okay on it, stamp of approval, that removes the mother from the story altogether, which I thought was interesting. But was there any thoughts on that, or anything else that you picked up that we've talked about along the way that you noticed in this one?
Well, we mentioned how like a lot of his films, Hitchcock's films, there's like hints at homosexuality, like obviously with Rope and some others were certain characters. And you mentioned that you brought up with Mrs. Danvers how she's more of a mother figure. Like in this, I don't know if I'm just because of the history we've talked about in the past, but like it made me wonder about what the relationship was between Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca, because it felt like
Yes.
there was an infatuation there that was, she loved her, and I think it was more so than just a friendly love. That's what I got from it. I don't know if that was intentional, but it seemed
I got the same
seemed
thing.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I got the same
Uh,
thing. I even read somebody had put out like I don't know if it's a research paper or like an article or a review or something where they kind of outlined all the different moments that you could like support that with, especially like when she still has her uh her dress, like her what do you I'm totally blanking. What do you call that?
Nightgown or
Yeah, when she
whatever.
has her nightgown and things like that, and the way she's handling it, and how careful she is with it, the fact that she knows exactly where it is, how she presents it to the new Mrs. Dan De Winter. Like I think there's multiple times in here where you can see that there was a infatuation slash obsession slash some type of relationship or a desire for a relationship between those two characters. I agree.
Yeah, and you mentioned Hollywood blondes, of course, like Joan Fontaine, and usually we've had the situation where someone was wrongfully accused, and this was kind of the flip of that, where someone
Yeah,
was did it and wasn't accused because people misunderstood it. I missed the Hitchcock cameo. I completely missed it. But I guess it's near the end when you mentioned the picnic scene around that time. I completely mentioned Hitchcock cameo, and this was the first time I didn't see it without having to go back and seeing where it was and catching him this time. Uh, but I'm not
I
I'm
missed
not
it
sure.
too, for the record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else that you had that regarding? Uh,
No, I didn't see necessarily anything. Like I think that there is definitely that play on the audience knowing what happened or thinking they know what happened, and whether it's somebody that's falsely accused or somebody that's rightfully accused that's getting away with it. Like that seems to be there's different takes on that for sure.
yeah.
And no, I think most of what we talked about was pretty on the nose. I did read that there was some potential problems with the movie back in this time period, because in 1940 there was some different standards and things of that nature, as far as the fact that we have somebody that murders somebody and that's going to get away with it and is portrayed as a hero. I think caused a
Yeah.
few sideways reactions from people that were involved in whether they're whether they're approving it or whether they're just reviewing it in the time period or trying to censor it after the fact. I think there was a little bit of that going on as well. But overall, I mean, I think you can connect enough dots to Hitchcock that you can still tell it's a Hitchcock film, even though it has a different feel than a lot of the other ones we've talked about. I do think it's interesting, like I said in the beginning, though, like going back now and trying to connect it to some of the earlier work, and I definitely think there is that attention or focus on some of the side characters and making them enjoyable characters that you almost want to know more about. Like, not that I necessarily want to know more about the employer of Mrs. Edith Van Hopper, but it's still
Yeah.
somebody that you're like, well, she obviously disappears for the rest of the movie, and you're like, well, what's going on with her? And then the estate manager, I think his name is Crawley. Like he has an interesting. You're wondering what else is there, because there's a few interesting interactions between him and Joan Fontaine's character as well. They have the beach hermit. Like you're wondering what's going on with him. Like wow, how did he get here and stuff like that. So there's enough of that where I feel like that's very reminiscent of some of the earlier Hitchcock films we watched as well. But how do you think it fit in kind of in the timeline, and when you connect it to like in the realm of 39 Steps, Notorious, and kind of that time period?
I think it fits well. Like I mentioned, I do feel like the acting is of that times,
Hmm.
especially Mrs. Fontaine. where it can be a bit, they're playing for the back of the room. Movies are still a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, guess what? They're probably around for 20, 30 years at this point, which isn't a huge amount of time when you think about it.
Right.
So where you compare it to some of the, like when we did some of the films out in the 60s and things like that, where I think have a different approach. And when you think of like what Notorious, I don't think even in that, I feel like the relationship in there had a bit more like not chemistry. I guess chemistry would be the right word, but it does feel very much of its time, but also dealing with the taboo in ways that in that era, like you mentioned, like having a character that is morally questionable, be the
Hmm.
hero, or like not have to feel like they need to have some moral lesson, where they kind of get away with everything, which is not that all common. Like these are some broken bad people, and it doesn't necessarily paint them in that light. Which so tonally, like there are aspects that feel very very much of that time, but also just the approach it takes with some of the narrative choices are
Yeah.
pretty uh, advanced for that era.
No, I agree as well. As far as some accolades for the film, it's got a 98% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. AFI and a couple of their different lists. One of them was 100 Years, 100 Thrills. It came in at number 80 as a film. And then also it's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains. Mrs. Danvers was the number 31 villain. As far as Academy Awards, it got nominated for 11, including Outstanding Production, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Screenplay, Art Direction, Cinematography, Film Editing, Original Score, and Special Effects. It won for cinematography and it won for Outstanding Production. Alfred Hitchcock loses one more time for Best Director. This time, John Ford and the Grapes of Wrath took it over him. But obviously, it has. I don't know if this is the most Academy Awards of any of his films, but it's got to be up there towards the top. Any final thoughts on any of that, or just final thoughts on the film in general?
It won Best Picture too, right? Like I remember
I think
it's
that's
listed there.
outstanding production at that time period was Best
Okay,
Picture. So yeah,
okay,
it
okay.
beat out The Grapes of Wrath, Foreign Correspondent. What other ones? The Philadelphia Story. So yeah, it did win the quote unquote Best Picture. Just called it something different back then.
It was a good year for movies then, huh?
Yeah.
But yeah, I really like this. It was high on my list of what we've seen thus far, and I was really glad I watched it. I'm glad we continued it because I think this is a huge important staple in his filmography. Like I mentioned, it might be a random comparison, but I do feel like it
I
does
agree.
fit as that movie that it shows that he has multiple speeds as a director, which I guess is much more. You could say much more because he's made like 1,000 movies, but of that high quality, like if you think all he can do is really good horror films or thrillers, Rebecca is an answer to that claim.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's going to be interesting for me to try to find where this one ranks amongst all the other ones. The more films we're covering, the harder it's getting to slot those into the spots.
Yeah,
As we for sure will do a final episode after we go through all the films with some of our own awards and things of that nature. I did a little work this last week to try to make sure I'm not going to get lost in the number of films we're covering. So I had to go back through before I forgot anything and be like, oh yeah, I like this character, I like that actress, whatever the case may be.
yeah.
So for our next film, it's going to be interesting. We're going to be going to 1941's Suspicion, which does in fact star Joan Fontaine, who wins an Academy Award for Best Actress for the film. We're going to also see her play with Cary Grant. So this is one of the, I believe, the two Cary Grant films we haven't seen yet of his appearances in Hitchcock films. And we're also going to get Leo G. Carroll, who was in this one and Strangers on a Train. He's going to show up again in Suspicion. I don't, assuming a smaller role, but we will see that as well. So, any thoughts or experience with the film Suspicion from 1941, just a year after Rebecca?
I have not no experience whatsoever. Like similar, I know nothing about it. Have never seen it. So going in completely blind again this time.
Yeah, so I'm interested to see that it got nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actress, and Best Score, and has a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it feels like it should be another interesting watch that I'm sure will be good on different levels. So I'm interested to see Cary Grant again, and now that I've seen Joan Fontaine, I'm interested to see those two interact with each other. I have no experience on the film, so I'm intrigued on where we go next. So if you want to give us any comments or feedback on our plot through the Alfred Hitchcock filmography, you can do that in a number of different ways. You can search out on social media the Cinema Geeks and leave us comments directly for the show, or you can go to geekcastradio.com and comment on any of the web posts as far as the site goes. You can also get in touch with us directly. Dan, you can search out at the Comic Concierge in just about every social media platform that exists, or at least more than I'm on. I'm still trying to learn how some of those work. And you can reach me on some of the main ones at Optimus Solo. Dan, anything else that you want to let anybody know about before we close this one out?
No, nothing. I was going to mention we're recording this. By the time it's out, Free Comic Book Day has already happened. But if you've missed it, maybe go to your local comic book store and you might have some leftover free comics if you wanted to check that out.
Awesome. So that does it for this episode. Tune in next time for another chance to listen to more of the Cinema Geeks.